If Colin Powell said it was so, then it was so. That made me feel even worse. So yes, I have trouble sometimes sleeping at night thinking about my participation in it.
1995, the quantities were vast. Less than a teaspoon of dry anthrax, a little bit about this amount. This is just about the amount of a teaspoon. Less than a teaspoon of dry anthrax. Shut down.
So the question you have to ask yourself is, if the evidence was so flimsy, why did Powell get up and make such an unequivocal case that Iraq had WMD and was an imminent threat? And the reason is that there was tremendous pressure inside and outside the administration to make that argument. And the question is, who was creating that pressure? And the answer is, it was the neoconservatives, almost single-handedly.
Dick Cheney and his minions have brought, and Richard Pearl is one of his minions, and Doug Feith is one of his minions, have brought the art of lying to a new scale, a new level. Was oil the #1 influence on President Bush and Vice President Cheney? Or was WMD? Or was spreading democracy? Don't believe it for a moment. They didn't even think about spreading democracy when they started this war. They transmogrified the mission into starting or democracy simply to appease the American people and to give them some reason to support the war. You have to decide, where were these factors? And inevitably, the Jewish lobby in America, AIPAC in particular, the focus lobby, has got to be there. You're being naive if you don't put that factor up there as an influence on national security decision-making, particularly with the Bush administration. The AIPAC lobby is very influential through Vice President Cheney, very influential, and through people like Elliott Abrams, Paul Wolfowitz, and a host of others within the government.
And of course, you don't want to lose sight of the fact that the Israeli government was also feeding the United States government intelligence, which said that Iraq had a serious WMD capability and was an imminent threat. There's an Israeli general named Shlomo Bram who has written a piece on this, which says, in effect, that Israel was a full partner in this scheme to convince the public in the United States and around the globe that Iraq was an imminent threat. Iraq was not an imminent threat. The fact is that even if Saddam had had nuclear weapons, there was nothing you could do with them, right? But you could not make those arguments at the time in the United States. It was very, very hard to get them out into the public domain and for them to get any traction.
Do you agree with Mearsheimer and Wohl that the influence of the pro-Israel lobby was important for going to war with Iraq?
I do, but I would not have presented it the way they did, because I think that they underestimate ideas and they underestimate, if you like, emotions. They're very cold and realistic in their view of politics. And for them, since going to war with Iraq is absolutely crazy, and it was pretty obviously crazy for many of us before, there must have been some pressure to do something so irrational. And of course there was. But they underestimate other factors. The illusion, for example, that we could have control of Iraq's oil and of the strategic region. The belief, which is a deep American belief, which was not invented by the Jewish lobby, that America knows how democracy should work and is an example to the world and has a moral duty and certainly a right to bring this example to the world. And it's all mixed together. So ideals, belief about American exceptionalism, American duties, American provincialism, not knowing about what's going on outside, and Israeli pressure. Yes.
The suggestion that that the Israeli lobby, as he describes it, is in effect operated by the Israelis and reflects Israeli preferences is simply wrong and can be shown to be wrong.
So you don't feel part of the Israeli lobby?
No, I'm not part of an Israeli lobby. I have my own views. I'm sympathetic to Israel, as most Americans are sympathetic to Israel. I'm not incapable of being critical of an Israeli policy that I don't like. But the main point is that it is not the Israeli government that shapes the thinking of Americans who are pro-Israeli.
Richard Pearl would probably say in response to your question, if you got the truth out of them, Israel's interests and America's interests are the same. And so if I'm an advocate for Israel's interest, I'm an advocate for America's interest. And I would say back to them, again as a strategist, bullshit. No two countries in history, and no two countries in the future in history, I will predict, will ever have coincidental national interest all the time. No way.
I don't want to kind of develop this great sense of victimhood, but I do feel, and it's, you know, I come here and I feel that we in Israel have paid the price. American Jews, surprise, surprise, are liberal Democrats when it comes to most issues, including the Middle East. So when you poll American Jews, they're for the peace process and they're for American engagement and they're for a two-state solution. And we did the Geneva Initiative and they were in favor of that as well. But the institutional, organized leadership of the community has kind of taken things in a very different direction. And I do feel that for their own reasons, reasons that I understand, reasons that are not unique to the Jewish diaspora in America, reasons that are prevalent in many diaspora politics around the world. It's to do with my identity in a diaspora, it's to do partially with guilt, it's to do with my own political role in my new host community, etc., etc. They've driven so-called pro-Israel politics in Washington in a direction which is directly antithetical to what is good for Israel. In that respect, yes, I do feel we paid a price. Of course, that has been increased manyfold under the current administration.
America has become part of the Israeli victim narrative. It began, I think, in the 70s, when one of the ways in which the African American community could begin to get amends for slavery and the consequences of slavery was by emphasizing that it was a victim of history. That even if you didn't do it, history did it. Your grandparents did it. It's not a personal responsibility, but there's a cultural debt. And the Holocaust, of course, is the ultimate victim narrative. And David Ben-Gurion, the first Israeli prime minister, knew this very well, because he turned it to advantage, giving Israel as a whole country a victim narrative. If you can't criticize someone because he himself is a victim, what do you do with a whole country, which is a country born of victimhood, so to speak? I have been in conversations many times with people who are very reasonable and would say, yes, you're right, Israel does do bad things. The occupied territories, stealing the water, stealing the land, bombing the houses, etc. But remember what happened to the Jews. There is a background, there is a history, there is a reason, there is an excuse for this. And of course, you can say the same thing for the Palestinians. Remember what happened to the Palestinians after the Nakba, 1948 and so on, 1967. No wonder they have suicide.